The snow fell in soft, lazy flakes coating the park bench where Elizabeth Carter sat alone on her 35th birthday. The January chill penetrated her cream-colored designer coat despite its perfect tailoring and cashmere lining. Her blonde hair fell in controlled waves around her shoulders, makeup flawless against the winter palette. But her eyes betrayed something the carefully curated exterior couldn't hide, a profound emptiness. 3 years as the youngest CEO in Carter Media Group's history should have felt like triumph. Instead, she stared at her phone, mindlessly scrolling through congratulatory messages from colleagues who were really just employees trying to impress the boss. Elizabeth's fingertips brushed against the small velvet box in her coat pocket, the engagement ring she'd been asked to return last month when Daniel finally walked away. The successful architect had reached his limit after 2 years of rescheduled dates, postponed vacations, and a twice-delayed wedding. The ring weighed heavier than its 2 carats should allow. She'd meant to return it to the jeweler weeks ago, but somehow couldn't complete that final admission of failure. The last text from Daniel still haunted her. "You'll marry your company, Liz. There's no room for anyone else." The bench offered Elizabeth a perfect view of the city skyline, where the Carter Media Tower dominated the landscape. Her father's legacy, now her kingdom. The empire she'd expanded through relentless 60-hour weeks and sacrificed relationships. The early darkness of winter settled around her as she wondered why achieving everything she'd worked for left her feeling so hollow on the day she should be celebrating. Memories of childhood birthdays surfaced unwanted. Her father perpetually absent at board meetings, her mother's progressively emptier eyes each year before she finally left when Elizabeth was 12. Elizabeth had sworn then, huddled in her too-large bedroom in their cold mansion, that she would never depend on anyone, never need anyone. Success meant self-sufficiency, independence, power. She'd built her life around those principles, becoming exactly what her father had groomed her to be, the perfect CEO, the flawless businesswoman, the Carter heir who finally earned Robert Carter's approval before his retirement. A small voice broke through her thoughts. "Excuse me, ma'am." Elizabeth blinked, startled from her reverie. A little girl stood before her, perhaps 5 years old, clutching a worn teddy bear, missing one eye. Her light blonde hair was pulled into a messy ponytail, and she wore a brown hooded coat at least one size too large. Snow collected on her tiny shoulders. "Yes," Elizabeth found herself softening her voice automatically. Something about the child's solemn expression touching something long dormant. The little girl studied Elizabeth with surprising intensity. "Are you sad?" The question hit with unexpected force. Elizabeth had fielded complex negotiations, hostile board members, and aggressive competitors, but this simple inquiry from a child left her momentarily speechless. "What makes you think that?" Elizabeth finally managed her carefully maintained facade, momentarily cracking. "You look like my daddy does sometimes when he thinks I'm not watching." The little girl tilted her head thoughtfully. "Like you're carrying something heavy that nobody can see." Elizabeth felt something catch in her throat. How had this child seen through her so easily? The carefully constructed walls that kept board members, employees, and even lovers at a distance, penetrated by a 5-year-old in a too-big coat. "Sometimes," Elizabeth admitted, surprised by her own honesty, "everyone feels sad sometimes." She glanced around, suddenly concerned. "Are you here with your parents?" "Just my daddy. He's over there." The girl pointed to a man on a nearby bench, phone pressed to his ear, free hand running through dark hair that needed a trim. Even from this distance, the tension in his shoulders was visible. "He's always on the phone for work. He says it's important." "I understand that," Elizabeth said quietly. The man's posture, the defeated slump despite the animated conversation, resonated with her. How many times had she dismissed someone with those exact words? How many relationships had she sacrificed on the altar of important work? "My name is Emma," the little girl declared, hugging her teddy bear closer. "This is Mr. Bear. His other eye is in heaven with my mama." Something in Elizabeth's chest contracted painfully. "I'm Elizabeth," she responded, suddenly hyper-aware of this child's reality in a way her wealth and position usually insulated her from. Emma studied her with those unnervingly perceptive eyes. "I don't have a mama. She's in heaven. Daddy says she's watching over me, but sometimes I really wish I could see her, talk to her, have someone to do girl things with." Her small voice wavered but didn't break. "Daddy tries. He really does, but he doesn't know how to do braids. And sometimes I just want..." Emma trailed off, then looked up with unexpected hopefulness. Ma'am, can I spend a day with you? Just one day? You could be my mama for a day. We could do girl things. I promise I'll be good. The request knocked the air from Elizabeth's lungs. Something long dormant stirred beneath her carefully constructed professional exterior. Something raw and unexamined that made her eyes burn with unexpected tears. Emma, Elizabeth began, not knowing how to respond. Please. Emma's voice was so small, so hopeful it made Elizabeth's chest ache. Just one day. Daddy's always busy and I don't have anyone to do mama things with. We could get ice cream or look at pretty things, or you could teach me stuff that mamas teach their little girls. Elizabeth looked at this small child, at the loneliness in her eyes that mirrored Elizabeth's own, and felt something shift inside her chest. She glanced over at the man, Emma's father, still absorbed in what appeared to be a difficult phone call. His free hand now pressed against his forehead in a gesture of frustration Elizabeth recognized from her own stress-filled days. Let me talk to your daddy first, okay? Elizabeth found herself saying. We need to make sure he says it's all right. Emma's face lit up like a sunrise. Really, you'll ask him? I'll ask him, Elizabeth confirmed, wondering what insanity had possessed her to even consider this. Yet as Emma grabbed her hand with small mitten-covered fingers and pulled her toward the man on the bench, Elizabeth felt something unfamiliar. A lightness, a purpose disconnected from quarterly reports and market shares. As they approached, she could hear the man's side of the conversation. I understand the deadline, but I'm a single parent. I can't work 16-hour days anymore. There has to be some flexibility. His voice held the strain of someone pushing against immovable obstacles. Yes, I know the project is important. I'm doing my best. He looked up as they approached and quickly ended the call. Up close, he appeared to be in his late 30s with kind but exhausted eyes. His jeans and dark jacket were quality but not designer, and stubble shadowed his jaw, suggesting shaving had been a low priority. He straightened immediately, and eyes darting between his daughter and Elizabeth with unmistakable concern. Emma, honey, I told you not to bother people. His voice was gentle despite the reprimand fatigue evident in every syllable. I didn't bother her, Daddy. I asked her something important. Emma looked up at Elizabeth encouragingly, still holding her hand. Elizabeth extended her free hand, suddenly aware of her Italian leather gloves and the diamond watch peeking from beneath her sleeve, markers of a world clearly different from his. I'm Elizabeth Carter. Your daughter just made a very sweet request, and I wanted to discuss it with you properly. The man's handshake was firm but brief, his expression cautious as he studied her. Michael Wilson, what kind of request? His eyes narrowed slightly as they took in Elizabeth's obviously expensive attire, the subtle markers of wealth that she took for granted. She asked if she could spend a day with me to do girl things and have someone be her mama for a day. Elizabeth kept her voice soft, watching his expression shift from confusion to protective concern. She told me her mother passed away. Michael's face crumpled slightly, a flash of pain quickly masked. Emma, honey, you can't just ask strangers. But she's not a stranger anymore, Daddy, Emma interrupted, words tumbling out in a rush. Her name is Elizabeth, and she's really nice, and she looks lonely like us, and maybe we could all be less lonely together. Elizabeth felt something inside her chest crack at the child's words. Michael's gaze shot to her face, examining her with new intensity, clearly torn between protecting his daughter and acknowledging her need. Miss Carter, I appreciate your kindness, but we couldn't possibly impose. You're not imposing. Emma asked. Elizabeth interrupted, then paused, surprised by her own next words. And honestly, I think I need this as much as she does. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff, unexpectedly vulnerable before this stranger and his perceptive daughter. Something in Elizabeth's voice must have reached Michael because his expression softened fractionally. Can we sit down and talk about this properly? They returned to Elizabeth's bench, Emma between them still clutching her teddy bear. Michael explained in quiet tones that his wife Catherine had died of cancer 2 years ago. Emma had been only 3 old enough to remember her mother, but young enough that those memories were already fading. He'd been struggling since then to balance his career as a software engineer at Smart Sys Solutions with being both parents to Emma. I'm trying to be both parents, but I'm failing at it. Michael's voice held no self-pity, just exhausted resignation. My company keeps demanding more hours and Emma needs attention I can't always give her. She needs female influence, someone to teach her things I don't know how to teach. Elizabeth listened, struck by the raw honesty of his struggle, so different from the calculated corporate confessions she navigated daily. She found herself sharing more than she'd intended about her position as CEO of Carter Media Group, about never having married, about pouring everything into her career, only to wake up on her 35th birthday completely alone. No family, no close friends, just work and more work. I came to this park to think, Elizabeth admitted quietly, to figure out if this is really the life I want. And then Emma appeared and saw right through me. She's a very perceptive little girl. Michael's smile was tinged with sadness and pride. She is. Her mother was the same way. His eyes drifted to his daughter, who was now showing Mr. Bear the falling snowflakes. Catherine could always see what people were trying to hide. The mention of Catherine seemed to remind Michael of the reality of their situation. His expression closed again, caution returning. Miss Carter. Elizabeth, please. Elizabeth, he corrected, studying her carefully. Why would you do this? You don't know us. The question deserved honesty. Elizabeth looked at Emma, then back to Michael. Because your daughter asked me if I was lonely, and I realized I am. I've spent 15 years building a career and forgot to build a life. Her gaze returned to Emma, who was now attempting to catch snowflakes on her tongue. And because she looks at me like maybe I could be something important to someone. Do you know how rare that is? Michael was quiet for a long moment, weighing her words against the potential risks of allowing his daughter to spend time with a stranger regardless of her corporate credentials. Can I think about it? Maybe we could exchange information. You could provide references. We could do this safely and properly. Of course. Elizabeth reached into her purse, suddenly grateful for the business card she always carried. My work number is on here, and I'll write my personal cell on the back. Call me if you decide this is something you were comfortable with. No pressure. As they parted ways, Emma waved enthusiastically, while Michael's expression remained guarded. Elizabeth watched them walk away, the little girl skipping, despite her too large coat, the father's shoulders still bearing their invisible weight. She should have felt relieved. Crisis averted, bizarre impulse, safely navigated without commitment. Instead, she felt strangely hollow, as if something important had slipped through her fingers. Elizabeth's penthouse felt cavernous that night, the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city lights without providing any warmth. Her birthday dinner consisted of expensive takeout eaten while reviewing acquisition reports. The phone call she'd been half expecting never came. She told herself that it was better this way. What had she been thinking? She knew nothing about children. Her schedule allowed no room for impromptu playdates. The entire idea had been momentary insanity triggered by birthday melancholy and a particularly perceptive child. Yet sleep eluded her. Emma's words echoed in her mind. Maybe we could all be less lonely together. Such a simple observation from a 5-year-old, yet it had pierced something fundamental in Elizabeth's carefully constructed world. What was the point of building an empire if you sat alone atop it? Morning brought no clarity. Elizabeth arrived at Carter Media Tower at her usual 7 a.m., immediately swept into the maelstrom of running a multimedia conglomerate. The quarterly board meeting loomed centered on the potential acquisition of smaller tech companies to expand their digital footprint. The CEO's office on the top floor isolated her from the daily bustle of the company's operations, exactly as her father had designed it. Power resided in distance, he'd always told her. Leaders couldn't be friends with the troops. The board meeting started at 9 a.m. sharp. Elizabeth presented acquisition targets with her usual precision, but something felt off. Roger Bennett, the CFO, who'd been with the company since her father's tenure, noticed her distraction. His pinched expression and pointed follow-up questions underscored his disapproval. Elizabeth Carter was known for laser-focused presentations, not wandering attention. Our primary acquisition target should be SmartSys Solutions, Roger insisted during his portion of the presentation. They've developed proprietary content management algorithms that would integrate perfectly with our publishing division. Their valuation is reasonable, and their team is small enough to be easily assimilated. And the name triggered something in Elizabeth's memory. SmartSys, isn't that where Michael Wilson works? The CTO is Wilson, yes, he's developed most of their proprietary technology. Roger's eyes narrowed. How did you know that? Elizabeth recovered quickly. I make it my business to know the key players in potential acquisitions. The lie came easily, but it left a strange taste in her mouth. She couldn't explain the coincidence to the board, that she just happened to meet the developer of technology they wanted to acquire while sitting on a park bench having an existential crisis. The meeting concluded with approval to pursue preliminary acquisition talks with SmartSys and two other companies. As the board members filed out, Roger lingered behind. Is everything all right, Elizabeth? His concerns seemed genuine, but Elizabeth had learned long ago that in business concern was often a mask for calculation. Perfectly fine. Why do you ask? You seem distracted today. Not like you. Roger had been her father's right hand for decades. At 62, he represented the old guard of the company, skeptical of Elizabeth's more progressive approaches despite her proven success. Just considering multiple angles on the acquisitions, Elizabeth gathered her materials, signaling the end of the conversation. I'll have the preliminary outreach plan by tomorrow. After Roger left, Elizabeth sat alone in the expansive boardroom, staring at the SmartSys profile. Michael Wilson's name and brief bio appeared on the executive team page. Single father of one daughter, chief technology officer, prior experience at Microsoft and Oracle. A photograph showed a slightly younger, more rested version of the man she'd met yesterday, smiling professionally for the corporate headshot. No hint of the exhaustion she'd witnessed in the park. A bizarre thought struck her. What if Emma's innocent request was actually corporate espionage? What if Michael had somehow engineered the entire encounter using his daughter to gain inside information about a company, considering acquiring his? Elizabeth dismissed the thought almost immediately. The surprise and wariness in Michael's eyes had been too genuine, the circumstances too random. Still, the coincidence unsettled her. If she pursued any kind of relationship with Emma, she would need to recuse herself from the SmartSys acquisition discussions. Corporate ethics demanded it. The thought brought unexpected relief, one less project on her overflowing plate. Elizabeth's afternoon was consumed by crisis management when a controversial interview from one of their network's anchors went viral for all the wrong reasons. By evening, she'd nearly convinced herself that the park encounter had been an aberration, a momentary weakness born of birthday melancholy. Then her phone rang with an unknown number. Michael's voice sounded even more tired than the day before. Elizabeth Carter, it's Michael Wilson, from the park. Yes, of course. Elizabeth was surprised by the flutter of anticipation in her stomach. Emma hasn't stopped talking about you. There was a mixture of amusement and concern in his voice. I've been thinking about her request, and I have concerns, legitimate ones, I think. That's completely understandable. Elizabeth moved to the window of her office, looking out at the city lights blinking on as dusk gathered. I did some research on you. Michael's tone was unapologetic. Carter Media Group is a massive corporation. You're its CEO. That's a lot of responsibility. It is, Elizabeth acknowledged, wondering where this was heading. Why would someone in your position want to spend time with a random 5-year-old? I need to understand that before I can consider this. The question was fair. Elizabeth considered her answer carefully, aware that her usual corporate polish wouldn't serve her here. I was raised by nannies and boarding schools while my parents built their empire. When my mother finally left, my father buried himself even deeper in work. Success was the only form of love I recognized. The admission felt raw, unfamiliar. When Emma asked if I was sad, it was the first time in years anyone had seen past the CEO to the person. I can't really explain it better than that. Silence stretched between them, crackling with the weight of too much honesty from a virtual stranger. Would you be willing to meet with me again? Michael finally asked. Without Emma, just to talk through this more. If I'm going to allow my daughter to spend time with you, I need to feel confident about who you are. I think that's wise, Elizabeth agreed, surprised by her own willingness to subject herself to the scrutiny. When would work for you? That's complicated. Michael's laugh held little humor. Between work and Emma's schedule, my free time is basically non-existent. Could you meet for coffee before work around 6:30? Elizabeth, who typically started reviewing overnight reports at 6 a.m., found herself agreeing to meet at a coffee shop near Michael's apartment the following morning. As she ended the call, she caught her reflection in the window. The powerful CEO of Carter Media Group rearranging her schedule for coffee with a man who clearly had reservations about her. All to possibly spend time with a 5-year-old she'd met by chance. It defied all logic, yet felt more right than anything had in years. The coffee shop was a far cry from the upscale establishments Elizabeth frequented. The furniture was mismatched, the art, local and amateur, the clientele a mix of students and early shift workers. Michael was already there when she arrived, nursing what appeared to be his second coffee, judging by the empty cup beside him. Elizabeth ordered a simple black coffee, noticing Michael's raised eyebrow as she declined the barista's offer of specialty drinks. She'd expected awkwardness, but Michael surprised her by getting straight to the point. "I need to understand what you're looking for from this arrangement." His directness was refreshing after the constant corporate doublespeak she navigated daily. "Emma is everything to me, everything. I need to be sure your interest is genuine and appropriate." "I understand." Elizabeth wrapped her hands around the mug, appreciating its warmth. "I don't have an agenda here, Michael. I'm not looking to adopt a child or invade your family. She paused, searching for words that wouldn't sound ridiculous. "I felt a connection to Emma, and maybe through her a reminder of what's missing in my own life." Michael studied her intently. "Have you worked with children before?" "No," Elizabeth admitted, "but I've been researching mentoring organizations. Many have structured programs for children who've lost parents. I was thinking that might be a better approach, something formal with oversight." Michael's expression softened slightly. "You've been looking into this?" "I have." Elizabeth pulled out her phone, showing him the information she'd gathered. "This organization, Bright Horizons, specializes in matching children who've lost parents with stable adult mentors. They require background checks, training, and regular check-ins. You'd be willing to go through all that? For a child you met once." Elizabeth met his gaze steadily. "I would, not just for Emma, but for myself too. I think we both recognized something in each other that day." Michael sipped his coffee, considering. "I'd want to be there for the first few meetings, and I'd need regular updates." "Of course," Elizabeth agreed, hope rising unexpectedly. "We could start very small, maybe an hour at the museum or lunch at a kid-friendly restaurant." "I'll need to think about it more," Michael said, but his expression had softened considerably. "And I'll look into this organization. If their screening process is as thorough as you say, that would help." As they parted ways, Michael hesitated. "There's something else you should know. Emma, she gets attached easily. If we do this and you decide it's not for you after a few meetings, it would devastate her. She's already lost her mother. I can't let her experience another abandonment." The weight of this responsibility settled on Elizabeth. "I understand. I wouldn't commit to this unless I was certain I could follow through." Michael nodded, seeming to accept her sincerity, if not fully trust it yet. "I'll call you after I've checked out Bright Horizons." Elizabeth arrived at the office later than she had in years. Roger's pointed look during the morning meeting communicated his disapproval clearly. Elizabeth ignored it, diving into work with renewed focus. By afternoon, she'd almost convinced herself that Michael would decide against the arrangement. It was the most logical choice. Why would he trust his precious daughter to a stranger with a demanding career and zero experience with children? 3 days passed without word. Elizabeth told herself it was for the best, even as she found herself thinking of Emma's hopeful expression when she'd asked to spend just one day together. On the fourth day, Elizabeth forced herself to focus entirely on work. The SmartSys acquisition was moving forward, though she'd recused herself from direct involvement, citing potential conflict of interest without elaborating. Roger had taken the lead, his aggressive approach exactly what her father would have wanted. The quarterly projections meeting ran late, pushing Elizabeth's departure well past 8 p.m. She was gathering her things when her assistant buzzed through. "Ms. Carter, there's a call from Bright Horizons on line 1. They said you'd want to take it." Elizabeth's heart skipped as she picked up the phone. The program coordinator was professional and thorough, explaining that Michael Wilson had applied for the mentorship program and listed Elizabeth as a potential mentor. Would she be willing to come in for screening and training 2 weeks later? Elizabeth found herself sitting in a bright classroom at the Bright Horizons Center, surrounded by potential mentors, learning about childhood grief and appropriate boundaries. The training was intensive. Background checks, interviews with psychologists, role-playing scenarios. Elizabeth approached it with the same determination she brought to major business initiatives, taking notes and asking pointed questions. The other participants occasionally shot curious glances her way, clearly recognizing the CEO whose face sometimes appeared in business publications. The final approval came on a Friday afternoon. Elizabeth was officially cleared to begin mentoring Emma with supervision for the first 3 sessions. She texted Michael immediately, surprised by her own excitement. Their first official meeting was scheduled for Saturday morning at the Children's Discovery Museum. Elizabeth arrived early, having spent an embarrassing amount of time deciding what to wear. Her usual designer outfits seemed inappropriate for chasing a 5-year-old through interactive exhibits. She'd finally settled on dark jeans, a cashmere sweater, and leather boots. Still quality, but less obviously expensive. Michael and Emma arrived precisely on time. Emma bounced with excitement, Mr. Bear clutched firmly in one hand. "You came, you really came." "Of course I came." Elizabeth smiled, feeling strangely nervous. "I promised, didn't I?" Michael looked marginally less exhausted than previous meetings, though wariness still lingered in his eyes. "I've explained to Emma that this is a special friendship through the Bright Horizons program, and that I'll be joining you today." "Daddy says you're my special friend, not my new mama," Emma explained seriously. "But that's okay because special friends can do fun things too." "That's exactly right," Elizabeth agreed, relieved by Michael's sensible approach. "Shall we go see the exhibits?" The museum proved both wonderful and challenging. Elizabeth had prepared by researching the exhibits, creating a mental itinerary of age-appropriate activities. What she hadn't prepared for was Emma's boundless energy and non-linear approach to exploration. The carefully planned schedule dissolved within minutes as Emma darted from exhibit to exhibit, asking questions faster than Elizabeth could answer them. "Why does the water move like that? Can we try the bubble maker? Did you know butterflies taste with their feet, Daddy?" Look at Elizabeth's face when I said that. Michael watched with barely concealed amusement as Elizabeth tried to keep up with the whirlwind that was his daughter. "She's always like this," he offered when Emma temporarily focused on the bubble exhibit. "Catherine used to say she's got a mind that sees everything at once." At the Art Center, Elizabeth helped Emma create a watercolor painting, surprised by how much she enjoyed the messy process. Michael sat nearby, ostensibly supervising, but soon became absorbed in sketching the scene before him. Emma and Elizabeth bent over their artwork, heads close together. When Emma went to wash her hands, Elizabeth glanced at Michael's sketchbook. The drawing captured Emma's delight, and surprisingly, a softness in Elizabeth's expression she hadn't known was visible. The skill evident in the quick sketch was remarkable. "You're very talented," she observed, genuinely impressed. Michael closed the sketchbook quickly, almost embarrassed. "Just a hobby. I used to dream of being an artist, but then life happened. Practical careers, mortgages, responsibilities." "You could still pursue it," Elizabeth suggested, "even part-time." Michael's laugh held little humor. "Between single parenting and 60-hour work weeks, there's barely time to sleep, let alone develop a hobby." The moment was interrupted by Emma's return, hands dripping, despite her efforts to dry them. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of exhibits, Emma's endless questions, and moments of unexpected joy as Elizabeth found herself relaxing into the experience rather than trying to control it. At the museum cafe for lunch, Emma's assessment of the morning was blunt. "Elizabeth doesn't know how to play right. She thinks too much about the rules." Heat rose to Elizabeth's cheeks, but Michael's response surprised her. "Sometimes adults forget how to play, Em. They get so busy with grown-up things that they forget the important stuff. Maybe you can teach Elizabeth how to play better next time." "Next time?" Emma's eyes widened with hope. "So we can do this again." Michael glanced at Elizabeth, something shifting in his expression. "If Elizabeth wants to, and if she has time with her important job." "I'd like that very much," Elizabeth said softly, realizing she meant it completely. As they prepared to leave, Emma suddenly hugged Elizabeth around the waist. "Thank you for today. It was the best day." Something in Elizabeth's chest squeezed painfully. She patted Emma's back awkwardly, unused to such open affection. "Thank you for inviting me into your day, Emma. I had fun too." Michael's expression as he watched the exchange was unreadable. Once Emma was distracted by the gift shop display, he spoke quietly. "You did well today. Better than I expected, honestly." "Thank you, I think," Elizabeth responded, unsure if it was a compliment. "I mean it. You didn't talk down to her or try to buy her affection with overpriced gift shop toys. You listened to her and engaged with her ideas, even the wilder ones." Michael ran a hand through his hair, a now familiar gesture. "Emma would like to see you again. The Bright Horizons counselor suggested we maintain a regular schedule if you're amenable. Maybe twice a month to start. Elizabeth found herself nodding before fully considering what this commitment would mean to her already overflowing schedule. I'd like that. Walking back to her car alone, Elizabeth felt strangely lighter than she had in years. She checked her phone out of habit. 15 emails, 3 missed calls, all work-related. For the first time in her career, she decided they could wait until Monday. The following Monday brought Elizabeth back to corporate reality with brutal efficiency. The Smart Sys acquisition was growing complicated. Roger reported resistance from their leadership team, particularly from Michael Wilson, who was apparently arguing against the sale to the board. He's their technological backbone, Roger explained during the executive briefing. Built most of their systems himself. He's worried we'll acquire them just for the technology and discard the team. Will we? Elizabeth asked sharply. Roger's expression was calculating. That's generally how acquisitions work in this industry. We need their content management system, not 20 additional developers doing work our team can absorb. Elizabeth felt her stomach tighten. Michael's job was at risk in this acquisition, the job he needed to support Emma. Yet she couldn't reveal her connection to him without creating an ethical nightmare. The conflict of interest she'd been avoiding had found her anyway. What if we considered maintaining their team as a separate R&D division? She suggested, keeping her tone neutral. Their innovation track record is impressive. It might be valuable to preserve that creative ecosystem. Roger's eyebrows rose. That would significantly impact the financial projections. The board approved this acquisition based on the efficiency gains from consolidation. Run the numbers both ways, Elizabeth directed. I want to see comparative projections before we finalize our approach. As Roger left, Elizabeth stared out at the city skyline, mind racing. She needed to recuse herself more formally from the SmartSys negotiations. Yet doing so would raise questions she couldn't answer without revealing her connection to Michael and Emma. The ethical tangle was growing more complicated by the day. The next 2 months established a rhythm to Elizabeth's newly bifurcated life. Twice monthly outings with Emma, always with Michael present at first, then occasionally with just the Bright Horizons counselor observing. Museum visits, baking cookies in Elizabeth's rarely used penthouse kitchen, a trip to the ballet that left Emma wide-eyed with wonder. Elizabeth found herself scheduling these events first, then building her work calendar around them, rather than the reverse, a shift that didn't go unnoticed at Carter Media. Roger cornered her after a particularly contentious board meeting where Elizabeth had argued successfully against his aggressive approach to the SmartSys acquisition. You've changed, Elizabeth. 3 months ago, you would have championed this deal exactly as I've structured it. 3 months ago, I hadn't thoroughly reviewed their innovation pipeline, Elizabeth countered smoothly. We're acquiring future potential as much as current technology. Gutting their team undermines that value. Roger's eyes narrowed. You've been leaving early on Fridays, taking entire Saturdays off. Now this sudden concern for preserving teams rather than maximizing efficiency. Your father would be disappointed. The comment was designed to sting. Robert Carter had built the company on ruthless efficiency, caring little for the human cost of business decisions. Elizabeth had followed that model her entire career, until recently. My father retired 3 years ago, Roger. I'm CEO now, and I'm making decisions that serve the long-term interests of this company. Elizabeth gathered her materials, signaling the end of the discussion. The board approved my approach. I suggest you focus on implementing it rather than questioning my commitment. As Elizabeth walked away, she wondered if Roger was right about one thing. She had changed. The Elizabeth of 3 months ago would never have risked a major acquisition strategy to potentially protect one employee she barely knew. Yet here she was reworking an entire corporate integration to preserve Michael's position without him even knowing she had any influence over the situation. The third time Elizabeth met Emma without Michael present was for a girls' day suggested by the Bright Horizons counselor. Elizabeth took Emma shopping for new spring clothes, then for ice cream, the entire outing supervised discreetly by the counselor. Emma chattered constantly, sharing stories about school, her friends, and increasingly memories of her mother. Mama used to take me for hot chocolate with extra whipped cream when I was good, Emma confided as they sat in a cafe. Before she got sick, we had special girls' days too. She sounds wonderful, Emma. Elizabeth carefully kept her tone gentle. What else do you remember about her? She sang songs at bedtime, and she could make pancakes shaped like animals. Emma's small face grew serious. Daddy has her pictures everywhere in our apartment, so I won't forget what she looks like. He says it's important to remember. Your daddy is very wise. Elizabeth agreed, feeling a deep ache for this child's loss. Emma studied Elizabeth with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. Do you have pictures of your mama? The question caught Elizabeth off guard. No, I don't. My mother left when I was a little older than you. We don't talk anymore. That's sad, Ahmed, Emma declared with 5-year-old directness. Everyone needs a mama. Not everyone gets to have one, Elizabeth responded carefully, but we can have other important people in our lives. Like special friends? Emma asked, face brightening. Exactly like that. Later, as the counselor drove Emma home, Elizabeth found herself sitting alone in the cafe, turning the conversation over in her mind. She hadn't spoken of her mother in years. Barbara Carter had left when the emptiness of her trophy wife existence became unbearable, choosing freedom over her daughter. Elizabeth had received boarding school tuition, expensive birthday gifts, and occasional strained phone calls, but never again a mother's presence. She'd buried that loss beneath ambition and achievement, telling herself it didn't matter. Yet here was Emma, half her heart torn away at age 3, still somehow radiating joy and openness, still believing in connection, still reaching for it despite the pain of loss. The contrast left Elizabeth questioning everything about the walls she'd built around her own life. The crisis came unexpectedly during a major presentation to international investors. Elizabeth was halfway through her carefully prepared remarks when her phone vibrated with a text from Michael, the first time he'd ever texted rather than communicated through Bright Horizons. The message was brief. Emma's school called. She's asking for you. High fever, possibly strep. I'm stuck in Seattle at a conference. Can you check on her? She's with my neighbor. Elizabeth froze mid-sentence, the boardroom suddenly seeming impossibly distant and irrelevant. Emma was sick and asking for her. Michael was trusting her to help. Ms. Carter, one of the investors prompted. The projection trends. Elizabeth made a split-second decision that would have been unthinkable 3 months earlier. I apologize, but we need to reschedule. A family emergency requires my immediate attention. She nodded to her CFO. Roger will provide the preliminary packets and will reconvene tomorrow. The shock on Roger's face mirrored what Elizabeth felt internally. In 10 years at Carter Media, first as COO and then as CEO, she had never not once left a major presentation for personal reasons. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. Personal problems stay at home. The company comes first always. Yet 30 minutes later, she was rushing into the elementary school nurse's office where Emma lay on a cot, face flushed with fever. Elizabeth. Despite her illness, Emma's face lit up. You came. Of course I came, sweetheart. The endearment slipped out naturally as Elizabeth placed a cool hand on Emma's forehead. Your daddy asked me to check on you while he's away. The school nurse looked relieved. Are you the emergency contact Mr. Wilson mentioned? We couldn't reach the grandparents. Yes. The lie came easily justified by the circumstances. I'll take her to the doctor right away. The next hours were a blur of pediatric urgent care antibiotics for confirmed strep throat and getting Emma settled in her own apartment with Michael's neighbor, Mrs. Chen, providing backup support. Elizabeth canceled her meetings for the remainder of the day, working remotely from Michael's modest apartment, while Emma napped on the couch beside her, occasionally waking to ask for water or another story. When Michael called that evening, the relief in his voice was palpable. I'm on the red-eye back tonight. I can't thank you enough, Elizabeth. When the school called and I was trapped in this conference, it's fine, Michael, really. Elizabeth moved to the kitchen to avoid waking Emma. She's on antibiotics and the fever's already down. We're watching Disney movies and having popsicles for dinner. The pause on the line stretched long enough that Elizabeth wondered if they'd been disconnected. You left work for her, Michael finally said, his voice strangely tight. I know who you are, Elizabeth. I know what your job demands. You walked out of something important to take care of my daughter. She needed me, Elizabeth said simply. The investors will still be there tomorrow. Another pause. I didn't expect this, you know. When Emma first approached you in the park, I thought you'd be a pleasant diversion for her, maybe a positive female role model who'd see her a few times before your real life took precedence. His voice softened. I didn't expect you to become important to her, to us. The words hung between them, freighted with meaning, neither was quite ready to articulate. I should check on Emma, Elizabeth said finally. Text me when your flight lands. Mrs. Chen will stay until you get home. Elizabeth, Michael's voice stopped her before she could end the call. Thank you, not just for today, but for seeing her, really seeing her. That night, as Elizabeth sat beside Emma's sleeping form, gently stroking sweaty hair from the child's forehead, she realized with startling clarity that her life had irreversibly changed. The carefully constructed walls between her personal and professional selves had crumbled, leaving her vulnerable in ways both terrifying and exhilarating. Somewhere between that snowy bench and this fevered night, she'd given her heart to this small family, a heart she'd spent decades pretending didn't exist. The revelation should have sent her running back to the safe, controlled world of Carter Media. Instead, as Emma stirred and murmured, "Love you, Elizabeth," in her half-sleep, Elizabeth felt something long frozen inside her crack, wide open. For the first time since childhood, she allowed herself to imagine a future defined not by corporate acquisitions and market share, but by love, messy and imperfect and terrifyingly real. The boardroom awaited tomorrow, along with Roger's judgment and the investor's demands. The Smart Sis acquisition. Michael's job, her own professional reputation. Complications piled upon complications. Yet watching Emma sleep, Elizabeth found herself strangely unafraid. Whatever challenges came, she would face them. Some things she was finally learning mattered more than quarterly projections and her father's approval. Some people were worth fighting for. Michael returned home just after midnight, exhaustion etched in the shadows beneath his eyes. The sight of Elizabeth asleep on his couch, Emma's small form curled against her, stopped him in the doorway. For a moment, he allowed himself to absorb the tableau. Two people who had been strangers 3 months ago now tangled together in sleep, Emma's feverish cheek pressed against Elizabeth's designer blouse with complete trust. Elizabeth stirred, sensing his presence. Their eyes met in the dim light, a current of something unspoken passing between them. She carefully extracted herself from Emma's grasp and moved to the kitchen where Michael had retreated. Her fever's down. The doctor said she should be able to return to school in 2 days. Elizabeth's voice was hushed, hair mussed from sleep vulnerability, visible in ways the polished CEO never allowed during daylight hours. Michael's expression softened with gratitude. You didn't have to stay. Mrs. Chen could have. I wanted to stay. The simple truth hung between them, neither willing to explore its fuller implications. 3 weeks later, after Emma had fully recovered, the tentative routine they had established shifted. Michael began allowing Elizabeth to take Emma for outings without the Bright Horizons counselor present, a significant demonstration of trust. Their twice-monthly meetings became weekly Elizabeth Saturdays, now reserved for museum visits, ballet lessons, and baking experiments in her rarely used kitchen. One Saturday afternoon, while Emma napped on Elizabeth's couch after an exhausting morning at the zoo, Michael studied the photos displayed on Elizabeth's shelves. All professional achievements, no personal connections visible. You've created an impressive life. His voice held no judgment, merely observation. Elizabeth followed his gaze across the awards and magazine covers bearing her image. I built what I thought mattered: success, recognition, control. And now her eyes drifted to Emma's sleeping form. Now I'm not so sure anymore. Their conversations during these handoffs grew longer, often stretching into dinners after Emma had been picked up or dropped off. Elizabeth learned about Catherine's battle with cancer, how Michael had tried balancing hospital visits with work responsibilities, always believing there would be more time, until suddenly there wasn't. Michael discovered the lonely childhood behind Elizabeth's drive, the boarding schools and absent parents' achievements as substitutes for affection. One evening over takeout containers in Elizabeth's immaculate dining room, Michael's curiosity pushed deeper. You never married, never had children. Was that a conscious choice or just circumstance? Elizabeth's fork paused midway to her mouth. Both, I suppose. I was engaged once last year. Daniel was an architect, brilliant, patient, understanding. Until he wasn't. What happened? I canceled our wedding date twice. Elizabeth set down her fork, appetite gone. Major acquisitions, company crises. He finally realized he had always come second to Carter Media. Michael considered this, his expression unreadable. I spent 10 years building software systems while Catherine built a home. I always thought there'd be time later for me to be more present. Then later never came. His voice grew rough with emotion. I built code all day, but I couldn't debug the most important error in my life, not giving enough time to the people I loved while they were still here. Something in Elizabeth's chest constricted at the raw honesty. They'd both prioritize work over love, but with vastly different consequences. The first serious complication arose when Emma's teacher called Michael after school one day. Elizabeth had agreed to pick Emma up for their Friday outing, providing all the necessary authorization through Bright Horizons. The school had been informed of the arrangement, but not the specifics of their relationship. Emma, in her innocent 5-year-old way, had referred to Elizabeth as my new mom during class discussion. Michael called Elizabeth, immediately embarrassment and concern evident in his voice. The teacher was confused. She thought perhaps we'd gotten married without updating Emma's records. I'm so sorry, Michael. I've always been careful about how I present myself to Emma. Elizabeth felt a flash of panic. Had she somehow overstepped, encouraged Emma to see her as a replacement mother? It's not your fault, Emma. She gets confused sometimes about what to call you. We should probably talk to her together, clarify things. Michael sighed heavily. She's been drawing family pictures with you in them, the school counselor noticed. The conversation with Emma was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Emma sat between them on Michael's worn couch. Mr. Bear clutched tightly as Michael gently explained that Elizabeth was a special friend, not a new mother. Emma's lower lip trembled. But she does mom things. She braids my hair and reads me stories and makes me soup when I'm sick. Those are friend things too, sweetheart, Michael explained patiently. Elizabeth cares about you very much, but she has a different role than Mommy did. Emma's eyes, so like her father's, turned to Elizabeth with devastating directness. Don't you want to be my mom? Elizabeth felt as though all the oxygen had been sucked from the room. The honest answer that she had begun to imagine exactly that couldn't be spoken. Not yet, not when everything was still so fragile. I want to be exactly who I am in your life, someone who cares about you enormously and loves spending time with you, someone who will always be here for you. Elizabeth chose her words with careful precision. Your mom will always be Catherine, and that's exactly as it should be. Emma seemed to consider this, her young mind processing complex emotional terrain. So you're not my mom, but you're not just my friend either. You're my Elizabeth. Relief washed through both adults. That's exactly right, Elizabeth affirmed. I'm your Elizabeth. The incident faded, but its implications lingered. Elizabeth found herself questioning her role in Emma's life, and by extension in Michael's. Were these weekly visits creating confusion for a child still processing grief? Was she setting everyone up for pain if circumstances changed? Her own feelings had grown complicated, attachment forming with a startling intensity to both the child and increasingly to her father. The situation grew thornier when Michael received an unexpected call from Catherine's parents. Margaret and Richard Davis had moved to Arizona after their daughter's death, finding the memories in the city too painful. Now, nearly 2 years later, they were moving back and wanted to reestablish regular contact with their granddaughter. Their first visit coincided with a Saturday Elizabeth had planned to take Emma to a children's theater production. Michael called to reschedule, apologetic but firm. They're her grandparents, Elizabeth. They have priority. The comment stung more than it should have. Of course, family comes first. Elizabeth kept her tone neutral while rearranging her weekend, pushing away the uncomfortable realization that she'd begun to think of herself as part of their family unit. The rescheduled theater outing 2 weeks later was overshadowed by Emma's constant chatter about Grandma Maggie and Grandpa Rich, and all the presents they'd brought her. Elizabeth listened with appropriate enthusiasm, while tamping down an unfamiliar emotion it took her several hours to identify as jealousy. Michael's expression when he picked Emma up that evening was apologetic. They've gone a bit overboard with the gifts and attention. They're trying to make up for lost time. It's wonderful that Emma has them back in her life. Elizabeth maintained her composed exterior while something inside her shifted uncomfortably. She needs her mother's family. They'd like to meet you. Michael's statement came unexpectedly as they watched Emma examining a display case in the theater lobby. I've told them about our arrangement, how important you've become to Emma. They're curious. Warning bells sounded in Elizabeth's mind. Curious or concerned? Michael's hesitation answered before his words could. A bit of both. They're protective, and they don't quite understand our situation. Margaret especially worries that Emma might get confused about Catherine's place in her life. The dinner with the Davises was scheduled for the following Friday at Michael's apartment. Elizabeth arrived precisely on time, bearing a bouquet of flowers for Margaret and a bottle of wine she'd researched to match Richard's preferences. Her designer dress was elegant, but understated her entire appearance, calibrated to project warmth and approachability rather than corporate power. Margaret Davis, a slender woman in her 60s with Catherine's blonde hair, now faded to silver, accepted the flowers with polite reserve. Richard, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, shook Elizabeth's hand with a grip that bordered on challenging. Emma, blissfully oblivious to the undercurrents, bounced between adults with excited energy. Grandma Elizabeth taught me how to braid hair, and Grandpa, she took me to the ballet where the dancers went on their tippy toes. Dinner progressed with surface pleasantries, masking the scrutiny Elizabeth felt from Catherine's parents. They asked carefully constructed questions about her background, her interest in children's welfare, and her relationship with Emma. Elizabeth answered with equal care, emphasizing her connection through Bright Horizons and her respect for Catherine's memory. The careful equilibrium shattered when Emma accidentally called Elizabeth Mom while asking for more juice. Margaret's fork clattered against her plate. Emma's eyes widened in immediate recognition of her mistake. I mean Elizabeth. I meant Elizabeth. The damage was done. Margaret's expression hardened as she turned to Michael. This is exactly what I was concerned about. She's forgetting Catherine. Mom, she's not forgetting. Michael's voice held warning. She made a simple mistake. Richard's contribution was equally pointed. Children are impressionable, Michael, particularly at Emma's age. Having another woman step into a maternal role so soon after Catherine, I am not trying to replace Catherine. Elizabeth kept her voice level, despite the accusation. Emma and I have a special relationship through a structured mentoring program. We've always been clear about my role. Margaret's gaze fixed on Elizabeth with sudden intensity. Why are you really here, Miss Carter? A successful CEO suddenly interested in mentoring one specific child. Do you know how that looks to those of us who love Emma? Mom, that's enough. Michael's tone left no room for argument. Elizabeth maintained her composure through years of corporate training, though her heart raced. I understand your concerns, Mrs. Davis. If I had a granddaughter, I'd be protective too. But my relationship with Emma developed organically through Bright Horizons. I care about her deeply, and I would never do anything to diminish Catherine's place in her life. Richard scoffed quietly. People like you, wealthy executives, you think you can buy your way into anything, including ready-made families. Our daughter's been gone barely 2 years. Michael stood abruptly. Emma, sweetheart, why don't you go play in your room for a little while? The grown-ups need to talk. After Emma reluctantly retreated, Michael faced his in-laws with controlled anger. Elizabeth has been nothing but positive in Emma's life. She's never tried to replace Catherine. She's never overstepped. She's followed every protocol Bright Horizons recommended. And she's confusing Emma, Margaret insisted. A child needs consistency, not someone who pops in when her busy schedule allows. Elizabeth felt each word like a physical blow, doubts she'd harbored herself now voiced by Catherine's mother. I've spent 15 years building a company, but I've forgotten to build relationships. I can't buy love, and I have no interest in trying. Elizabeth addressed Margaret directly. Emma taught me that. She saw something in me that day in the park, something I'd forgotten was there. I'm not trying to be her mother. I'm trying to be someone who matters in her life, who helps her grow, who honors the memory of the mother she lost by caring for the daughter she left behind. The raw honesty of her words created a momentary silence. Richard's expression remained skeptical, but Margaret's eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The conversation continued with careful civility, but the evening was effectively over. As Elizabeth prepared to leave, Margaret followed her to the door while Michael was distracted by Emma. Catherine was everything to us. Margaret's voice was low, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When we lost her, we lost ourselves for a while. That's why we left. We couldn't bear to see Michael and Emma continuing without her. Elizabeth nodded, understanding more than Margaret might realize about building walls against pain. We thought moving back would help us reconnect with what's left of her. We didn't expect to find you. Margaret studied Elizabeth with piercing intensity. She wanted more children, you know. Catherine. She and Michael were planning a bigger family before she got sick. The comment landed with precision, reminding Elizabeth of her temporary status in their lives. She managed a polite goodbye, maintaining her composure until she reached her car, where the carefully constructed professional mask finally crumbled. The Davis reappearance created a new dynamic. Weekends once reserved for Elizabeth now competed with grandparent visits. Michael tried to balance everyone's expectations, but inevitably Elizabeth found her time with Emma reduced. She told herself it was natural, appropriate even. Emma should spend time with her mother's parents. The situation grew more complicated when Elizabeth's annual medical checkup revealed uterine fibroids requiring surgery. The doctor's careful explanation about potential impacts on future fertility hit with unexpected force. At 35, Elizabeth had never seriously considered children. Her career had consumed every ounce of her ambition. Yet sitting in the sterile exam room facing the possible foreclosure of that option, she felt a grief she hadn't anticipated. She kept the diagnosis to herself, scheduling the surgery for a month later. The operation would require 2 weeks of recovery, time she'd need to explain to Michael and Emma, though not necessarily why. The thought of discussing fertility concerns with Michael felt impossibly intimate, crossing boundaries in their careful relationship. The professional and personal collided catastrophically when news of Carter Media's intention to acquire SmartSys leaked to industry publications. Elizabeth had removed herself from direct involvement in the acquisition negotiations, but her strategic direction, preserving the SmartSys team rather than absorbing just the technology, remained company policy despite Roger's continued objections. Michael appeared at her office, unannounced fury radiating from his normally calm demeanor. Her assistant's apologetic expression as he brushed past her suggested he had been insistent. SmartSys is being acquired by Carter Media. Michael's voice was dangerously quiet, controlled rage visible in his clenched jaw. Were you planning to mention that your company is swallowing mine? Elizabeth rose from her desk, heartbeat accelerating. Michael, I recused myself from those negotiations precisely because of our personal connection. I can't discuss this with you. Convenient ethical boundaries. His laugh held no humor. How long have you known? Was this why you befriended Emma? Some twisted corporate espionage using a 5-year-old as cover. The accusation struck like a physical blow. That's not fair. I didn't know who you were when we met. I recused myself the moment I realized the connection. But you knew eventually. All these months you knew your company was targeting mine and you said nothing. Michael paced the expansive office, anger emanating from every movement. Do you know what happens in these acquisitions? Teams get gutted, redundancies eliminated. I built SmartSys's systems. Once your company has the technology, they won't need me. Elizabeth struggled to maintain professional distance when all she wanted was to reassure him. Michael, I can't discuss the terms of an acquisition that hasn't been finalized, but I would never use a child to gain corporate advantage, manipulate a grieving single father. His words sliced through her defenses. I thought I knew you, Elizabeth. I thought what we were building with Emma was real. It is real. Elizabeth fought to keep emotion from her voice, years of boardroom battles providing inadequate preparation for this confrontation. Everything with Emma with you, it's completely separate from business. Nothing is separate from business for people like you. The class distinction in his words cut deeper than he could know. You move through the world, taking what you want, thinking your wealth and power entitle you to everything, including playing family with someone else's child when it suits your schedule. Michael's words struck every insecurity Elizabeth had harbored since their relationship began. She struggled to respond, professional composure warring with personal devastation. Michael, please, let me explain. There's nothing to explain. My daughter is not a hobby you can pick up when you're bored with corporate life. My family is not a project you can abandon when you lose interest. Michael moved toward the door, then paused. Emma has lost enough. I won't let her be hurt again. After he left, Elizabeth sat motionless behind her desk, the empire she'd built suddenly seeming hollow and meaningless. The carefully constructed wall between personal and professional had collapsed entirely, burying her beneath the rubble. Elizabeth canceled her meetings for the remainder of the day, something she'd never done before Emma entered her life. Alone in her office as evening shadows lengthened, she tried calling Michael repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. She drafted and deleted countless text messages, none adequately expressing what she needed to say. The next morning brought the news that Michael had withdrawn his opposition to the acquisition. Roger reported with satisfaction that SmartSys's CTO had seen reason, and the deal was proceeding smoothly. What Roger didn't know, couldn't know, was that Michael's cooperation came at the cost of whatever had been growing between him and Elizabeth. 3 days of unanswered calls later, Elizabeth received a text from Michael. Emma keeps asking about you. For her sake only, we need to discuss how to end this relationship appropriately. Professional counselor from Bright Horizons should be involved. The clinical tone crushed whatever hope Elizabeth had maintained. Michael intended to sever their connection completely with professional assistance to minimize damage to Emma. The scenario she had feared from the beginning was unfolding. She would become another loss in Emma's young life. Elizabeth's response was equally controlled. I understand. Whatever is best for Emma, please let me know when and where. The meeting was scheduled at the Bright Horizons Center, Neutral Territory, with counseling support available. Elizabeth arrived early, stomach knotted with dread. The counselor she'd worked with for months greeted her with compassionate professionalism, explaining that Emma was struggling with confusion and anxiety since the abrupt interruption of her routine with Elizabeth. Michael arrived without Emma, his expression guarded. The physical distance he maintained while they sat in the counselor's office spoke volumes about the emotional chasm that had opened between them. The counselor facilitated their conversation with practiced skill, helping them navigate the complexity of ending a relationship that had become significant to a child already dealing with profound loss. Michael's responses remained measured, detached. Only when discussing Emma did emotions seep into his voice. She's having nightmares again, asking if people she loves are going to disappear. His exhaustion was evident in the shadows beneath his eyes. The school counselor thinks she's developing separation anxiety. She refuses to go to school some mornings, afraid I won't be there when she returns. Guilt pressed against Elizabeth's chest. I never wanted to cause her more pain. Intentions don't matter much with 5-year-olds. Michael's response held no malice, just tired resignation. Results do. The counselor suggested a gradual reduction in contact rather than an abrupt cessation. A few more supervised visits of decreasing length with clear communication to Emma about the changing relationship. Elizabeth agreed to whatever approach would minimize Emma's distress, though each planned final visit felt like another twist of the knife. As they prepared to leave, the counselor excused herself momentarily, leaving them in uncomfortable silence. Elizabeth gathered her courage. I'm scheduled for surgery next week. Uterine fibroids. Nothing life-threatening, but recovery will take time. She hadn't planned to share this, but something compelled her to explain the coming absence. The doctor says there might be implications for future fertility. Michael's expression softened marginally, the first crack in his armor. I'm sorry to hear that. Will someone be taking care of you? The question highlighted the isolation Elizabeth had built around herself. I've arranged for a private nurse for the first few days. After that, I should manage fine on my own. Another silence stretched between them, weighted with all they weren't saying. I never used Emma to gain business advantage. I didn't know about the acquisition when we met, and I recused myself immediately when I realized the connection. Elizabeth kept her voice low, steady. I understand why you don't believe me, but it's the truth. Michael studied her for a long moment. Margaret told me something after you left that night. She said she could tell you genuinely care for Emma. His expression remained guarded. But caring isn't always enough, Elizabeth. Sometimes love means recognizing when your presence causes more harm than good. The statement hung between them as the counselor returned, finalizing arrangements for their supervised transition plan. Elizabeth maintained her composure through the remainder of the meeting, saving her breakdown for the privacy of her car, a pattern becoming distressingly familiar. The final blow came a week before Elizabeth's scheduled surgery, delivered by Roger during a routine executive meeting. SmartSys's CTO has accepted a position with Nexus Tech in Seattle. He'll be leaving immediately after the acquisition closes. Elizabeth felt the room tilt slightly. Michael Wilson is moving to Seattle. Roger raised an eyebrow at her use of his first name. Yes, apparently Nexus made him an offer he couldn't refuse. Director of Engineering, substantial compensation package. He requested expedited closure of our acquisition. Michael was leaving, taking Emma nearly 1,000 miles away. The realization struck Elizabeth with physical force. He hadn't mentioned this during their transition planning, hadn't given any indication he was considering such a drastic change. She would lose them both entirely, not just to emotional distance, but to physical separation that would make any future reconciliation nearly impossible. Elizabeth's carefully constructed professional mask slipped. When did he accept this position? Yesterday afternoon. Roger's expression held curiosity at her evident distress. Is there a problem? This actually simplifies our integration. We won't need to determine a role for him within our structure. Elizabeth excused herself from the meeting, claiming a sudden migraine. In her office, she tried calling Michael again, knowing he wouldn't answer, but needing to try anyway. His voicemail greeting felt like a door slammed in her face. The next morning brought a formal email from the Bright Horizons counselor. Michael had requested cancellation of their remaining transition sessions. He and Emma would be relocating to Seattle within the month. The counselor expressed professional regret about the abrupt ending, but emphasized Michael's right to make decisions in his daughter's best interest. Elizabeth read the email multiple times, searching for anything between the lines. There was nothing, just the clinical termination of a relationship that had come to define her life outside work. Emma would vanish from her world as suddenly as she had entered it, leaving Elizabeth with nothing but memories and the hollow ache of what might have been. That evening, alone in her penthouse with the city lights spread below, Elizabeth faced the truth she'd been avoiding for months. She had fallen in love, not just with Emma, but with Michael too, with the idea of family they represented, with the person she became in their presence. And now, preparing for surgery that questioned her potential for future motherhood, she confronted the possibility that her chance at the family she hadn't known she wanted was slipping away entirely. Elizabeth Carter, the CEO who never flinched from difficult decisions, found herself paralyzed. Professional ethics prevented her from using her position to influence the acquisition that had triggered this cascade of loss. Pride prevented her from begging Michael to reconsider. Fear prevented her from fully acknowledging the depth of what she stood to lose. The woman who had built an empire stood at her window, watching darkness settle over the city, facing the most painful realization of her life. That success without connection was no success at all, and that the walls she had built to protect herself had become her prison instead. The morning of Elizabeth's surgery arrived, with unseasonable rainwater streaming down the hospital windows like tears she refused to shed. 6 weeks had passed since Michael's revelation about Seattle, each day stretching emptier than the last. Elizabeth had thrown herself into work with renewed intensity, staying at the office until midnight, starting again before dawn. The familiar pattern of workaholism felt hollow now, its purpose avoiding emotional connection exposed and ineffective. Pre-op preparations proceeded with mechanical efficiency. Elizabeth answered medical questions, signed forms changed into the standard issue gown. The private room she'd secured offered minimal comfort with its attempt at hotel-like amenities. No amount of premium services could disguise the essential loneliness of facing surgery without a single personal visitor. Any family members in the waiting room, we should update after the procedure. The nurse's question was routine, her clipboard poised for names Elizabeth couldn't provide. No, just my assistant. She'll check in by phone. Elizabeth maintained her composed exterior while something inside crumpled at the stark reality of her isolation. The anesthesiologist explained the procedure with practiced detachment. As consciousness began slipping away, Elizabeth found herself thinking of Emma's small hand in hers at the museum, of Michael's tired smile, when he'd returned to find his daughter happily exhausted from their adventures. The family she'd glimpsed, but never claimed, faded with the hospital lights. Recovery brought pain sharper than expected. Elizabeth woke to the surgeon's cautiously optimistic report. The fibroids had been more extensive than imaging suggested, but the procedure had gone well. Future fertility remained a possibility, though not a certainty. The information should have provided relief. Instead, Elizabeth found herself staring at the ceiling as tears finally escaped. What good was the possibility of future children when she'd already lost the only family that mattered? The private nurse Elizabeth had hired managed her physical recovery with professional efficiency. The penthouse transformed into a medicalized space with scheduled charts for medication and limitations on movement carefully outlined. What the nurse couldn't address was the hollow emptiness that expanded with each passing day. Elizabeth followed recovery protocols with the same determination she applied to corporate strategies. Physical healing progressed on schedule. She took prescribed medications, performed recommended exercises, attended follow-up appointments. The external metrics of recovery showed appropriate progress. The internal landscape remained barren. 2 weeks into recovery, Elizabeth received an unexpected delivery, a hand-drawn card featuring a lopsided rainbow and an unmistakable childish scrawl, "Get better soon. Love, Emma." No note from Michael accompanied it, no explanation of how he'd known about her surgery or why he'd allowed Emma to send the card despite their ruptured relationship. Elizabeth traced the crayon lines with trembling fingers. The nurse, witnessing this first display of emotion, tactfully withdrew to provide privacy for the tears that followed. That night, Elizabeth made a decision. If this was her only remaining connection to Emma, she would honor it. She called a florist, ordering a small stuffed bear with a rainbow ribbon to be delivered to the Wilson apartment. The brief note she included was addressed solely to Emma. "Thank you for thinking of me. I miss you very much." She didn't expect a response. Michael had made his boundaries clear. The gesture was for Emma and for herself, acknowledgement that whatever else had been lost, the connection with this child had been real. 3 days later, her phone rang with Michael's number. Elizabeth's heart stuttered as she answered, her voice carefully controlled. Michael's tone was cautious, measured. "Emma received your gift. She sleeps with the bear every night. I thought you should know. Thank you for letting her send the card. It meant everything to me." Elizabeth chose her words carefully, avoiding anything that might sever this fragile thread. "The surgery, was it what you expected? Are you recovering all right?" The questions revealed more care than Michael likely intended. Elizabeth provided a brief factual update on her medical status. The conversation continued with careful neutrality, neither acknowledging the deeper currents beneath their exchange. As they prepared to end the call, Michael hesitated. "Emma asks about you every day. I don't know what to tell her anymore." The admission cracked the careful veneer they'd maintained. "What do you want to tell her, Michael?" The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken complications. "I don't know. That's the problem. I'm trying to do what's best for her, but I'm not sure what that is anymore." No resolution followed, just a tentative agreement to think about things before the call ended. Elizabeth set down the phone, allowing herself the smallest flicker of hope, where before there had been only resignation. 4 weeks after surgery, Elizabeth returned to the office. The corporate machine had continued in her absence, Roger Bennett assuming many of her responsibilities with evident satisfaction. The SmartSys acquisition had closed successfully. Integration teams were mapping personnel transitions and technological transfers. Michael's resignation was already processed, his final day scheduled for the following Friday before his move to Seattle. Elizabeth's return created visible discomfort among executives who had grown accustomed to Roger's leadership style. Her first act was to request complete documentation on the SmartSys integration plans, particularly personnel decisions. The resulting files confirmed her fears. The majority of SmartSys employees were slated for redundancy processing once intellectual property transfers completed. That evening, Elizabeth worked late examining SmartSys's organizational structure, technology platforms, and market positioning. A plan began forming, radical by Carter Media standards, but potentially viable. She worked through the night assembling financial projections, market analyses, and staffing models for a completely different approach to the acquisition. Morning found Elizabeth still at her desk when Roger arrived, surprise evident at finding the CEO already working after her medical absence. "You should be easing back into things." His concern might have been genuine, his ambition undeniably real. "I've been reviewing the SmartSys integration." Elizabeth indicated the spread of documents across her desk. "I'm making significant changes to our approach." Roger's expression tightened. "The board approved the current integration plan while you were recovering. Everything is proceeding on schedule. The board will approve my revised plan at tomorrow's meeting." Elizabeth's tone left no room for debate. Instead of absorbing their technology and discarding the team, we're establishing SmartSys as an R&D division with expanded scope and resources. That completely undermines the financial model that justified the acquisition. The efficiency gains come from eliminating redundant personnel. Roger's voice rose with each word. "The value isn't just in their current technology, it's in their innovation capacity. the team's ability to create what comes next. Elizabeth pushed a folder across the desk. These are the revised projections. The short-term gains are smaller, but the 3-year and 5-year outlooks show substantially higher returns from ongoing innovation. Roger didn't touch the folder. This is about him, isn't it, the smart cis CTO? I've seen how you've avoided the acquisition discussions, recused yourself without explanation. There's something personal going on. Elizabeth had anticipated this challenge. My recusal was precisely to avoid any appearance of personal influence. I'm CEO of this company, Roger. I don't need to explain my strategic decisions to you. The board may feel differently. Your judgment appears compromised. First, the extended absence, now this abrupt reversal on an approved strategy. Roger's threat was thinly veiled. Robert Carter would never have allowed personal feelings to interfere with business decisions. Elizabeth stood, her full height advantage evident as she faced her CFO. My father built a company focused solely on quarterly returns. I'm building one that values sustainable innovation and human capital. If the board prefers my father's approach, they're welcome to call him out of retirement. The executive meeting that afternoon became a battlefield, with Roger marshaling supporters against Elizabeth's revised strategy. The debate grew, heated divisions forming among the leadership team. Elizabeth maintained her position with unwavering determination, presenting market analyses and talent retention statistics supporting her approach. As the meeting concluded without resolution, Elizabeth knew the following day's board presentation would determine not just the fate of SmartSys employees, but potentially her own leadership. Roger was already contacting board members building opposition to her proposal. That evening, Elizabeth did something unprecedented in her career. She left work early, directing her driver to a familiar address. The modest apartment building where Michael and Emma lived appeared unchanged, though Elizabeth knew everything inside had likely been disrupted by packing for the impending move. She sat in the car for nearly 20 minutes debating whether to approach. Professional ethics warred with personal need. Eventually, she instructed her driver to return to her penthouse, unwilling to complicate Michael's life further without invitation. Her phone rang just as she entered her home. The caller ID displayed the Bright Horizon Center, an unexpected connection at this hour. The counselor's voice held controlled urgency. Ms. Carter, I apologize for calling so late. I've been trying to reach you. What's happened is something wrong with Emma. Alarm shot through Elizabeth's system. Emma's been admitted to Memorial Children's Hospital with pneumonia. Her condition deteriorated rapidly today. Michael's with her, but the counselor hesitated. Emma's been asking for you repeatedly. The medical team is concerned about her emotional distress complicating her physical condition. Elizabeth was already moving toward the door. I'm on my way. Does Michael know you're calling me? He asked me to call you. He's been trying to reach you directly, but apparently had an old number. The hospital corridors stretched endlessly as Elizabeth followed a nurse toward the pediatric intensive care unit. Her heart pounded with each step, fear and hope warring within her chest. The sight of Michael slumped in a chair outside a patient room stopped her momentarily. He looked utterly destroyed, stubble darkening his jaw, clothes rumpled from what appeared to be days of wear. He glanced up, registering her presence with evident relief. You came. Of course I came. The words echoed their first meeting with Emma months and lifetimes ago. How is she? Michael's composure cracked. Not good. The fever spiked suddenly yesterday. By the time I got her to the doctor, she was struggling to breathe. They admitted her immediately. His voice broke on the final word. Her immune system was already weak from the strep throat. The doctor says sometimes these secondary infections hit harder. Elizabeth approached cautiously, uncertain of boundaries in this fragile moment. Can I see her, Baum? Michael nodded, leading her toward the room's door. They have her sedated to help with the breathing treatments. She might not wake up, but... He swallowed hard. I thought if she sensed you were here, it might help. The sight of Emma in the hospital bed shattered Elizabeth's remaining defenses. The vibrant, chattering child lay pale and still, an oxygen mask covering her small face monitors, tracking vital signs with steady beeps. Elizabeth moved to the bedside, gently taking Emma's limp hand in hers. I'm here, sweet girl. Your Elizabeth is here. The words emerged as a whisper meant for Emma alone. Michael stood at the foot of the bed, watching them with exhausted eyes. She kept asking for you. Even with the fever so high, she kept saying you always came when you promised. The responsibility of that trust weighed on Elizabeth. She pulled a chair to Emma's bedside, settling in with determination. I'll stay as long as she needs me, as long as you'll allow. Michael nodded mutely before collapsing back into the chair by the window, the fight temporarily gone from his body. They maintained silent vigil together, the beeping monitors and hiss of oxygen, the only sounds marking the passage of time. Hours later, a nurse insisted Michael get proper rest. Your daughter is stable, Mr. Wilson. You haven't slept properly in days. There's a parent room down the hall where you can lie down. Ms. Carter can stay with Emma. Michael hesitated the decision to trust Elizabeth with his daughter in this vulnerable state, visibly difficult. Finally, exhaustion won. You'll call me if anything changes. Promise me. I promise, Michael, I won't leave her side. After he reluctantly departed, Elizabeth maintained her position beside Emma's bed, gently stroking the child's hair and speaking soft words of encouragement. Near dawn, Emma stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open briefly. Elizabeth. Her voice was barely audible beneath the oxygen mask. You came. Elizabeth leaned closer, heart constricting. I'll always come when you need me, sweetheart. Always. Emma's eyes closed again as medication pulled her back towards sleep, but her small hand tightened fractionally around Elizabeth's fingers, the barest acknowledgement of connection maintained, despite all that had tried to sever it. Michael returned shortly after, somewhat restored by a few hours of sleep. He found Elizabeth in exactly the same position, still holding Emma's hand, still whispering encouragements. Something in his expression shifted as he observed them, a softening, a recognition. The nurse says her oxygen levels improved overnight. Michael's voice held cautious hope. The antibiotics might be starting to work. Elizabeth nodded, reluctant to release Emma's hand, even as Michael approached. She woke briefly, just for a moment. Did she know you were here? Yes, she recognized me. Elizabeth finally looked up, meeting Michael's gaze directly. I told her I'll always come when she needs me. I meant it, Michael. The declaration hung between them, not quite a challenge, not quite a plea. Michael sank into the chair opposite the bed, and Emma's small form creating both connection and barrier between them. I believed you were using us. The admission seemed torn from him. When I learned about the acquisition, it made sense of everything. The successful CEO suddenly interested in a random child. Why else would someone like you care about us? Elizabeth flinched at the reminder of the gulf between their worlds. Someone like me, wealthy, powerful, moving through spaces I'll never access. Michael gestured vaguely at her designer clothing, visibly rumpled from the night's vigil, yet still marking her as different. People like you don't usually notice people like us unless you want something. The observation stung with its painful accuracy. Elizabeth had moved through life, taking what she wanted, expecting doors to open, needs to be met. Emma's simple question in the park had been the first genuine human connection, not mediated through power or position, in longer than she could remember. I was lonely. Elizabeth's admission matched his in reluctant honesty. Completely alone on my 35th birthday, surrounded by everything money can buy, and nothing that actually matters. Emma saw that. Not the CEO, not the wealth, just a lonely woman on a park bench. Morning light strengthened outside the window as they sat in weighted silence, Emma's small form breathing steadier between them. A nurse entered to check vitals, reporting continued improvement with professional optimism. After she departed, Michael spoke again, voice low to avoid disturbing his daughter. Margaret called me from the waiting room. She and Richard have been here since yesterday. They saw you arrive last night, but didn't want to intrude. Elizabeth tensed, expecting judgment or demands that she leave. I can go if they want time with Emma. I don't want to create more conflict. That's not why I mentioned it. Michael's gaze returned to his daughter's face. Margaret said something that surprised me. She said she could see why Emma loves you so much. That watching you last night reminded her of how Catherine would sit with Emma when she was sick, like nothing in the world could make you leave her side. The comparison to Emma's mother from Margaret, of all people, left Elizabeth momentarily speechless. I never meant to compete with Catherine's memory. I know how important it is for Emma to remember her mother. Elizabeth chose her words with care, aware of the fragility of this moment. I know that now. Michael shifted, discomfort evident in his posture. The job in Seattle, I took it because running seemed easier than sorting through all this. Easier than figuring out what place you have in our lives. Easier than admitting I might have feelings I wasn't ready for. The admission hung between them, neither quite prepared to explore its implications with Emma still recovering beside them. For 2 days, they maintained rotation at Emma's bedside, joined occasionally by Margaret and Richard, in a cautious truce born of shared concern for Emma. The child's condition improved steadily, her natural resilience asserting itself as antibiotics fought the infection. During a rare moment when Emma slept and they were alone, Michael raised the subject of Carter Media again. The HR department called yesterday. They're processing separation packages for most of the SmartSys team. Apparently, the integration plan changed. Elizabeth measured her response carefully. I've proposed establishing SmartSys as our R&D division instead of absorbing just the technology. The board votes tomorrow. Michael studied her with newfound intensity. Why would you do that? It can't be the most profitable approach short term, because good people built something valuable together. Breaking that up for quick profit destroys the innovation engine that made the technology valuable in the first place. Elizabeth held his gaze steadily. This has nothing to do with us personally. It's the right business decision for long-term growth. And if the board disagrees, Elizabeth's smile held grim determination, then they'll need to find a new CEO. I've made my position clear. The following morning brought the board meeting that would determine multiple futures. Elizabeth arrived impeccably prepared the previous night, spent refining projections and counter-arguments, while Emma slept peacefully in her improving condition. Roger had marshaled significant opposition, 5 of the 11 board members clearly aligned with his position before discussion even began. Elizabeth presented her case methodically emphasizing innovation potential, talent retention, and long-term market positioning over immediate cost savings. The debate grew heated as Roger launched his counter-argument. This proposal fundamentally changes the financial model that justified the acquisition. The CEO's judgment appears compromised by personal factors, specifically her relationship with a key SmartSys employee. The accusation hung in the boardroom air like a thrown gauntlet. Elizabeth had anticipated this attack, prepared her response carefully. My relationship with any individuals at SmartSys has no bearing on this business decision. I recused myself from acquisition negotiations precisely to avoid any appearance of conflict. Elizabeth directed her gaze to each board member in turn. But since Mr. Bennett has raised the issue, let me address it directly. Yes, I formed a connection with a SmartSys employee and his daughter through a formal mentoring program. That relationship gave me insight into the quality of people within that organization, their innovation capacity, their dedication, their collaborative culture. Those insights inform my recommendation today, not any personal considerations. The board chair, Eleanor Winters, studied Elizabeth thoughtfully. Roger suggests your judgment is compromised. I suggest it might be enhanced by seeing the human capital behind the technology. The question remains, which approach best serves Carter Media's future? The discussion continued for hours. Financial models compared, market projections debated. As afternoon waned, the vote remained uncertain, the board evenly divided with the chair's position unclear. Eleanor finally raised her hand for silence. Before we vote, I have one question for Elizabeth. The Seattle position offered to Michael Wilson, did you know about it before today? Elizabeth met the older woman's gaze directly. Yes, I learned of it approximately 2 weeks ago. And did you attempt to block it or interfere in any way? No, that would have been an inappropriate use of my position. Elizabeth maintained steady eye contact. Personal and professional boundaries must remain distinct even when difficult. Eleanor nodded, seemingly satisfied. Then I believe you have demonstrated exactly the judgment we need in leadership. You've identified the right strategic approach while maintaining ethical boundaries under considerable personal pressure. I vote in favor of the proposal. The final tally supported Elizabeth's vision, 7 votes to 4, with Roger's opposition noted but overruled. As the board members filed out, Eleanor lingered behind. Robert chose well when he named you successor. The older woman's approval carried significant weight as the longest-serving board member. He built through acquisition and cost-cutting. You're building through innovation and talent development. Different approaches for different market realities. Elizabeth accepted the validation with appropriate gratitude, waiting until she was alone before allowing herself a moment of pure relief. The professional battle was won. The personal remained uncertain. She called Michael from her office, updating him on the board's decision. His response was guarded appreciation for the reprieve offered to his team, tempered by awareness of continuing complications between them. "Does this change your plans for Seattle?" Elizabeth finally asked the question that had haunted her. "I don't know." Michael's honesty remained his most defining quality. "Emma's still recovering. The doctor wants her stable before any significant changes. I need to think about what's best for her." "And for you," Elizabeth pressed gently, "what do you need, Michael?" The question hung between them, neither prepared for where honest answers might lead. "I need time," he finally responded, "to sort through everything that's happened, to figure out what's real and what's possible." Elizabeth returned to the hospital that evening, finding Emma awake and significantly improved, sitting up and coloring with Margaret. The older woman acknowledged Elizabeth with newfound warmth, a silent recognition of shared concern for the child between them. Richard stood as Elizabeth entered, surprising her by extending his hand. "You stayed with her all night. Margaret told me." His gruff voice held reluctant respect. Catherine would have appreciated that. The olive branch, small but significant, created space for careful conversation as they all orbited Emma's recovery. The child herself proved the greatest healer, her resilience drawing them together in shared relief as her condition improved daily. A week later, Emma was discharged with instructions for continued rest and medication. Michael had obtained extended leave from work, the Seattle position temporarily deferred while he considered options. Elizabeth maintained careful distance, visiting only when invited, respecting the fragile reconstruction occurring between them. 3 weeks after Emma's hospitalization, Elizabeth received a text from Michael asking her to meet him at the park where everything had begun. Snow no longer covered the ground early spring, bringing tentative green to the landscape. Elizabeth arrived to find Michael already seated on the bench where she'd first encountered Emma. "This feels like coming full circle." Michael gestured to the space beside him. "I thought it was appropriate for this conversation." Elizabeth settled beside him, heart racing despite her outward composure. "How's Emma doing?" "Much better, back to her usual energy level, though the doctor wants us to be careful about overexertion for another month." Michael stared ahead at the playground where children chased each other in complicated games. "She asks about you every day. Wants to know when she can see her Elizabeth again." The possessive pronoun created warmth in Elizabeth's chest. "Whenever you think it's appropriate. I'm following your lead here, Michael. That's part of why I wanted to talk." Michael turned to face her directly. "I declined the Seattle position yesterday. We're staying here." Elizabeth controlled her immediate surge of joy, seeking understanding before celebration. "What changed your mind?" "Many things. The new division you are creating at SmartSys, Emma's doctors here who know her history, her school and friends." Michael paused, gathering courage for what came next. "And you, the way you dropped everything when Emma needed you. The way you fought for my team without telling me, without using it to earn forgiveness." A tentative smile formed on Elizabeth's lips. "Does that mean I'm forgiven anyway?" "I think we both made mistakes. I judged you based on assumptions about wealthy executives rather than what I actually knew about you as a person." Michael's expression softened with self-deprecation. "Pretty ironic considering how much I hated feeling judged for being a struggling single dad." The acknowledgement created opening for Elizabeth's own confession. "I should have told you about the acquisition as soon as I knew. Recusing myself professionally didn't absolve me from personal honesty." They sat in companionable silence, watching children play as spring sunshine strengthened. Michael finally spoke again, voice thoughtful. "I think we need to start over. Not forget everything that happened, but build something new with better communication, clearer boundaries." "I'd like that very much." Elizabeth turned to face him fully. "What does starting over look like to you? Dinner, just the two of us. An actual date without mentoring programs or supervision." Michael's smile reached his eyes for the first time in months. "See if there's something real between us separate from Emma. Because if we're going to do this, really do this, it needs to be solid for all our sakes." Elizabeth nodded, understanding the wisdom in his approach. "Emma's already lost one mother figure. We can't risk her losing another if things don't work between us." "Exactly." Michael's respect for her understanding was evident in his expression. "So we take it slow, figure out us first, then how we include Emma if when the time is right." Their first official date occurred the following Friday dinner at a restaurant nicer than Michael would typically choose, but not so exclusive that he felt uncomfortable. Elizabeth wore a simple dress rather than her usual designer attire, consciously minimizing the external markers of their different worlds. Conversation flowed more easily than either expected, freed from the constraints of supervised visits and corporate complications. Elizabeth shared stories of boarding school mischief. Michael described his early dreams of becoming an artist before practical considerations led him to software development. They discovered shared tastes in films, complementary perspectives on politics, mutual appreciation for dry humor. Tell me something no one at Carter Media knows about you. Michael's question came over dessert playful, yet seeking deeper connection. Elizabeth considered before answering. I wanted to be a veterinarian when I was young. Had my heart set on it until my father informed me that Carter's ran companies, not animal clinics. You'd have made a terrifying vet. All those poor, intimidated puppies. Michael's teasing held warmth rather than judgment, though you'd probably have revolutionized veterinary medicine through sheer determination. Their laughter bridged remaining distance, creating space for authenticity neither had expected to find again. As Michael walked Elizabeth to her car, the moment for a first kiss arrived naturally. The connection was tentative questioning, then deepening with shared recognition that whatever grew between them would be chosen consciously rather than falling into them by circumstance. Over the following weeks, they established careful patterns. Dates occurred when Emma stayed with her grandparents, who had become surprisingly supportive after Elizabeth's vigil at the hospital. Professional boundaries remained clear, Michael leading the newly established R&D division at SmartSys with minimal direct interaction with Elizabeth in her CEO capacity. Their personal relationship developed with deliberate care, each step considered, each progression discussed. Elizabeth found herself relishing this methodical approach after years of corporate decisions made at lightning speed. The slow unfolding allowed space for questions and adjustments, for learning each other beyond surface impressions. Emma's reintroduction to their evolving relationship came gradually. Initial meetings occurred in public settings, the zoo, museums, parks, where the focus remained on activity rather than change dynamics. Elizabeth maintained her role as special friend, while private conversations between adults navigated the territory toward potential partnership. 4 months into their careful reconstruction, Elizabeth faced another medical appointment, the follow-up after her fibroid surgery. Michael offered to accompany her, the gesture significant in its normalcy. The news proved unexpectedly positive. Healing had progressed well, the doctor revising earlier cautions about fertility challenges. If children are in your future plans, there's no medical reason to delay or worry unduly. The doctor's casual statement created charged silence on the drive back to Elizabeth's penthouse. Neither had discussed children beyond Emma, the possibility too distant while rebuilding trust. That evening over dinner in Elizabeth's rarely used kitchen, Michael finally broached the subject. Does having biological children matter to you? It's something we should probably discuss if we're getting serious. His directness remained refreshing after years of corporate doublespeak. Elizabeth considered carefully before responding. 6 months ago, I'd never seriously thought about children at all. My company was my legacy. She met his gaze directly. Now I know there's more to life than quarterly earnings. But loving Emma has shown me that biology isn't what makes a family. Love does. Catherine and I always talked about having more children. Michael's voice softened with memory. Emma was going to be a big sister. Then everything changed with the diagnosis. And now, Elizabeth kept her tone neutral, careful not to press. Now I'm falling in love with a remarkable woman who's shown me that second chances exist. Michael reached across the counter, taking her hand. I don't know what our future holds, but I know I want to find out together. The admission, the first direct acknowledgement of love between them, shifted something fundamental. Elizabeth found herself imagining possibilities previously unimagined. Family dinners, shared holidays, the messy integration of lives built separately but continued together. 2 weeks later, Margaret and Richard invited them both to dinner, the first such gathering since the hospital vigil. Emma bounced with excitement at having all her favorite adults in one place, the generations united by love for this perceptive child. Over coffee, while Emma showed Michael something in her room, Margaret addressed Elizabeth directly. Richard and I owe you an apology. We judged you unfairly based on preconceptions rather than actions. No apology necessary. Elizabeth had learned grace through this journey. You were protecting Emma and Catherine's memory. I would have done the same. Catherine believed that true success wasn't measured by what you built, but by who you loved along the way. Richard's gruff voice softened with memory. She would be pleased that Emma has you in her life, that Michael has found someone who sees his worth. Margaret reached into her purse, retrieving a small velvet box. This was Catherine's, her grandmother's before that. We'd like you to have it, not to replace her, but to continue the love she valued. The antique bracelet within delicate silver with a small sapphire clasp represented more than jewelry. It symbolized acceptance, continuity, family expanding rather than replacing. Elizabeth's carefully composed exterior cracked at this unexpected gesture. Are you sure this should go to Emma when she's older? Emma will have her mother's wedding ring and necklace. This was always meant for the next generation. Margaret's smile held bittersweet wisdom. Catherine would want it this way. For the woman who loves her family when she no longer can. The profound acceptance marked turning point for them all. What had begun as cautious reconstruction transformed into conscious building of something new, a blended family honoring the past while creating future together. 6 months later, Michael proposed on the park bench where Emma had first approached Elizabeth. The location deliberate, the moment private, just the two of them at dawn before the day's demands began. I've never met anyone who transformed my world so completely just by sitting on a bench, looking sad. Michael's smile held all the love that had grown between them. Will you marry me, Elizabeth? Be my partner, be Emma's parent, alongside me, be the center of this family we're building. The ring was modest by Elizabeth's usual standards. Michael had insisted on purchasing it himself rather than using her wealth. Its simplicity made it perfect, representing values recalibrated through loving this man and his daughter. Yes. Elizabeth's response required no consideration. To all of it, yes. Emma's reaction to their engagement brought unexpected complications, not resistance, but overwhelming enthusiasm. The child immediately began planning her role as flower girl, announcing to teachers, classmates, and random strangers that Daddy and Elizabeth are getting married, and I helped. Wedding preparations balanced Michael's desire for simplicity with Elizabeth's instinct for detailed planning. They compromised on an intimate garden ceremony with carefully curated guests. No corporate obligations, no social climbing, just people who mattered in their lives. Elizabeth stepped back from daily CEO responsibilities during wedding planning, delegating operational oversight while maintaining strategic direction. The company continued thriving under her revised leadership approach, one that valued balance alongside achievement, innovation alongside efficiency. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect spring flowers creating natural decoration throughout the botanical garden venue. Margaret helped Elizabeth prepare the relationship between them, having evolved from adversaries to something approaching mother and daughter. Catherine would be so pleased. Margaret adjusted Elizabeth's simple veil with steady hands. Not because you're replacing her, no one could, but because you're loving her family with your whole heart. Elizabeth squeezed the older woman's hand in silent gratitude for this final blessing. The ceremony itself remained uncomplicated, personal vows, traditional structure, Emma bouncing with excitement between her grandparents until her moment to scatter petals arrived. The child took her responsibility with uncharacteristic seriousness, carefully distributing flowers before taking her place beside Michael at the altar. When Elizabeth appeared at the garden path entrance, Michael's expression of wonder created ripples of emotion throughout the assembled guests. She moved toward him with steady steps, leaving behind the isolated corporate warrior and becoming partner-parent family. Their vows acknowledged past and future, Michael honoring Catherine's memory while embracing new beginnings, Elizabeth recognizing the unexpected gift of family she'd found through a chance encounter. Emma's contribution came during the ring exchange, her small voice clear in the garden quiet. I asked Elizabeth to be my mama for one day, and she said yes. And then she stayed forever. Every day. Not a dry eye remained among the guests. Elizabeth knelt to Emma's level, careful of her dress. You saw me when I was invisible to everyone else. You found me when I was lost. I promise to love you every day for the rest of my life. The reception unfolded with joyful informality. Elizabeth's corporate associates mingling with Michael's software colleagues, Margaret and Richard dancing with unexpected vigor, Emma racing between groups with inexhaustible energy. Roger Bennett approached the couple during a quiet moment, his corporate mask softened by the occasion. I was wrong about you, Elizabeth, about your vision for the company, about your personal choices. The admission clearly cost him considerable pride. The Smart Sys division has exceeded projections. Your balanced leadership approach is working. Your father would be proud. Elizabeth accepted the olive branch, graciously recognizing growth when offered. My father built what he knew how to build. I'm doing the same, just with different blueprints. As celebrations continued around them, Michael pulled Elizabeth into a quiet corner of the garden. Happy Mrs. Wilson. Deliriously, Mr. Wilson, Elizabeth leaned into his embrace, professional armor completely discarded. Though legally it's Wilson Carter, I couldn't completely abandon tradition. Hyphenation seems appropriate for our thoroughly modern family. Michael's smile held everything she'd never known she needed. Speaking of which, Emma has been asking when she might get a little brother or sister. Elizabeth laughed with genuine joy. Perhaps we should enjoy being newlyweds for a minute before expanding the family. Absolutely. Though with Emma's determination, I suspect she'll wear us down quickly. Michael's expression grew momentarily serious. Did you ever imagine this? That day in the park when a little girl asked if you were sad? Never. I couldn't have conceived of such happiness. Elizabeth touched his face gently. I was building an empire and forgot to build a life. Emma saw that somehow. She saved me as much as I helped her. Their moment of reflection ended as Emma bounded toward them, dress smudged with grass stains, flower crown askew. Daddy, Elizabeth, Grandpa says it's time for cake. 3 years later, Elizabeth sat on the same park bench where everything had begun. Spring sunshine warmed the air as she pushed a stroller containing her 6-month-old son, James. Emma, now 8, sat beside her reading a book far beyond typical third-grade level. What are you thinking about? Emma glanced up, her perceptive nature unchanged by the passing years. About the day we met. About how you asked if I was lonely. Elizabeth smiled at the memory that had transformed her life. Were you time? Very. I didn't realize how much until you asked. Elizabeth adjusted the blanket around the sleeping baby. Are you still lonely? Emma considered the question with characteristic seriousness. No, not anymore, thanks to you. She leaned against Elizabeth's shoulder, book temporarily forgotten. Michael approached across the park lawn, returning with coffee for himself and Elizabeth. He looked younger somehow than when they'd first met, the constant exhaustion replaced by contentment, the wary defensiveness transformed into confident affection. Elizabeth had maintained her position as CEO while restructuring corporate culture to value work-life balance. The Smart Sys division under Michael's leadership had become Carter Media's innovation engine, developing technologies that transformed their market position. The professional success felt meaningful, now supporting rather than replacing personal fulfillment. Margaret and Richard had moved closer, becoming integral grandparents to both Emma and James. Family dinner every Sunday brought generations together, Catherine's memory honored alongside present joy rather than overshadowed by it. As Michael joined them on the bench, Emma suddenly announced, I think sometimes angels come as little girls with teddy bears, and sometimes they come as sad ladies on park benches, and sometimes they find each other exactly when they're supposed to. Elizabeth exchanged glances with Michael, the profound observation typical of their remarkable daughter. Emma had inherited her biological mother's insight alongside the strength she'd developed through loss and love. I think you might be right, sweetheart. Elizabeth wrapped an arm around Emma's shoulders as Michael cradled their sleeping son. The most important things aren't what we achieve, but who we become together. The real magic happens when we recognize each other through all the armor we wear. The family lingered on the bench where chance had brought them together years before. Elizabeth Carter Wilson, who had spent decades building corporate success, reflected on the unexpected truth she'd discovered through a child's simple question, that the legacy worth building wasn't measured in acquisitions or market share, but in moments of connection and family forged through choice rather than circumstance, in love that transformed rather than consumed. The empire remained balanced now with the life that gave it meaning, all because a little girl had seen past her carefully constructed facade and asked a question that changed everything. Can I spend a day with you? One day had become forever, and Elizabeth wouldn't have it any other way.